We're live.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our regular council meeting for Monday, May the 30th. Before we get into our regular meeting agenda, we do have a couple of matters to discuss through Committee of Adjustment. So I will call the Committee of Adjustment meeting to order first. Tonight, we have a public meeting being held under sections 45 and 53 of the Planning Act to consider a consent application as well as a minor variance application. The minor variance application, which is file A22-05, is for the property located at 246 Irwin Street. And the purpose of the application is to request relief from sections 3.4.1 sub 2 and 5.68 of zoning bylaw number 38-2007 in order to construct a converted dwelling with a second dwelling unit in the cellar of the existing dwelling. The second one, which is consent application number B22-01, is for the property located at 250 Main Street East. And the purpose and effect of this application is to sever a portion of the property to have a land area of 303.25 square meters to create a new residential lot for a single detached dwelling on the subject lands. And at this point, I will ask the clerk to provide the method of service. Method of notice rather, for the public meeting.
Notice of tonight's public meeting was advertised in local media sources. Notice is posted on the Town of Shelburne website, and property owners within a 60-meter radius have received notification.
Thank you. So in the case of each application this evening, we'll have a presentation from our town planner, Steve Weaver, and he will provide a summary of the written comments that have been received, and then there'll be an opportunity for members of the committee to ask questions, as well as any members of the public who have signed on. When we get to that stage, if there are any public members that wish to speak, I would just ask that you provide your name and address before you ask your question or provide your comment. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Weaver. Are we going to do the minor variance first, Steve?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, everybody. So with our typical public meeting format, I do have a presentation for each application just to provide some graphics to illustrate some of the details of the application. So I'll share my screen and walk you through that now. All right. Can you see that okay, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, good on my end.
So this first application is minor variance A2205 for the property at 246 Irwin Street. Just a quick overview of the location context. So this is a residential lot in Greenbrook Village. It is on the bend of Irwin Street between Wallace Street and Morden Ave. And Morden Drive, and it's among a single detached residential subdivision. As I'm sure many of you are familiar with the subdivision, it's got a consistent single detached and similar lot size pattern throughout the subdivision, generally 40 to 45 foot lots. Each of the homes in the subdivision does have a 2-car garage and a driveway wide enough for 2 cars. In addition, on this side of the street, there is no sidewalk. So the homes on this side of the street do have some additional extra parking space. So this graphic is flipped the other way with the front over on the right-hand side. This is the site plan provided by the applicant. This lot is one of the larger ones on the street because it is pie-shaped. And so it gets wider as you go back, and you can see that the setbacks at the sides are larger than on the typical rectangular lots. And so the owner is proposing to finish the basement as a second residential unit, making this a converted dwelling, which is a use permitted in the zoning bylaw. However, because of the way the use is defined as it being not below grade, and the regulations of the bylaw, which say it would have to be 50% or more above grade in order to meet the definition of a basement rather than a cellar. a variance has been requested to allow relief from that. And so this is very similar to a number of previous variance applications that have been considered by the committee for similar basement apartments. So just to highlight on this plan, there would be a side entrance proposed into the lower level of the dwelling in approximately this location. And there is lots of room. So if you can't read the dimensions there, this is 1.9 meter at the narrow part and 2.6 meters at the wider part. So lots of room to walk down the side without having any concern about encroachment on the neighboring property. So in terms of the basement layout itself, it would be a 1-bedroom apartment. And the layout's been provided by the applicant just to show the bedroom in the back corner with the window being enlarged to meet the egress requirements of the building code. There's a living and kitchen area as well. And I apologize, this is a 2nd bedroom as well on the plan. The labeling got a little bit messed up there, but it's, I believe, a 2-bedroom apartment. Washroom, and then outside of the kitchen/living area would be this access to the exit stair with the proposed side entrance. You'll see that in this hatched area, the owner is proposing to reserve part of the basement for their own use with a separate staircase that goes to that level from above. Just basically for a bedroom for the main dwelling, a wet bar, and the furnace/utility room. So this is the crux of the matter that's part of this application. Again, the zoning bylaw defines a cellar and a basement as 2 different things, with a cellar being where most of the dwelling floor, the vertical height between the floor and the ceiling is located below grade, and a basement being 50% or more above grade. So not necessarily what we would traditionally think of as a basement. And what that does is significantly limit the number and type of homes that can have a basement apartment or a lower level apartment. Because the bylaw regulates that a cellar cannot be used for a dwelling unit. So the purpose of the variance is to request that provided all building code, fire code, electrical safety code requirements are met, which will be required, that the basement of the unit, which is technically defined as a cellar in the bylaw, could be used for a 2nd unit. So we did not receive any negative or comments or objections to the application. It was circulated in accordance with the Planning Act. There is a servicing reserve that has been set up for this sort of thing in the stage 1 and 2 area. And because the lot is within the existing built-up boundary, it would qualify for some of that servicing reserve for this kind of thing. Nevertheless, we are recommending, because we don't always know how soon the applicants will file a building permit application to proceed with the work, we're recommending 2 conditions. One, that at the time of municipal approval of a building permit, the engineer would have to confirm adequate servicing reserve capacity. And then secondly, within a year of that, so that the use it or lose it part of the condition is you have to have a building permit filed or the applicant is required to obtain a building permit within 1 year of that date, just to make sure that that capacity is used for what it was reserved for. So I'll stop sharing my screen at this point, and we'd be happy to entertain any questions. And of course, we're here to entertain any questions from the public tonight as well. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Steve. Any questions from the committee? Member Bonato.
Quick question. When they're building the stairs and they've got the, 4.8 meters of room there for the stairs to go down, where is the dirt going to be traveled out to? And if any damage is done to the neighbors, is the owner prepared to fix, repair? And is there a fence?
There's no fence shown on the plan, through you, Mr. Chair. Just answering the last question, first. That's something we can look into. With any of these side stairwells that require excavation, there would be a lot grading approval with the municipal approval for building a permit, and that would come with a $2,000 lot grading deposit. So we do make sure that it's done in accordance with an approved plan and that there's an inspection before everything is released for occupancy. So we would make sure that any surplus, excavated dirt is properly removed from the site, as well as making sure that all grading and drainage related matters are addressed, and any damaged areas, if there's damage to the yard or the grass, that it's restored to its previous or better condition.
So with the fact that there's no fence there, what happens if we have complaints of privacy issues? Since we don't have a fencing bylaw.
Well, I mean, that would be treated the same as any other complaint. Residents or occupants of any home are entitled to walk down their side yard. So, a side entrance could be constructed without any kind of planning approvals, regardless of whether the basement's used as a separate unit. So I'm not sure that that's a valid complaint with people using a side entrance. Some dwellings have that and some don't. But as long as they don't encroach on neighboring properties or cause any damage to their property or any rely on their land for access or any drainage concerns, there's no bylaw violation in terms of having a side entrance.
I wasn't worried about the side entrance. My worry is that both the proponent and the owner on the side of where the intended stairwell is, I'm not sure if there's windows on that side of the house. But I know with the fact that you mentioned there's windows and stairway going down, I was just concerned about the issue of possible privacy complaints. That's all.
Okay. Any other questions from committee members? Okay. Sorry, Member Wagner.
Yes, thank you very much. So just, I guess, within the plan, it looks like they're going to be installing like 2 bathrooms then, because the basement's not finished at all, right?
I'll just go back to the plan here for a second.
Because I thought I saw a retained basement for the homeowner and then, or sorry, bathroom for the homeowner and then a bathroom for the apartment.
Yeah, I
You're
think there's
correct.
one on the side.
Okay.
Yes.
So yeah, just making sure, of course, with our allocations that, obviously we're within our limits and we make sure that we adjust that accordingly because, again, it's 2 more bathrooms now. So yeah, hopefully we're not getting too close. All right.
Yeah,
Thank you
sure.
very much. I was just double checking.
You're correct, and it's not 100% clear on the drawing if the existing is already there in the basement, but like if there's already a finished bathroom in the basement, I'm not sure. It just says that it's owner occupied and shows that, well, I guess we'll find out at the building permit stage. But there is, a limit to how many plumbing fixtures a dwelling can have before it starts to impact the size of their water service and their meter. So as long as it's all within that, which will be confirmed through the building code review process, and there shouldn't be an issue in terms of sanitary and water service capacities for the lot.
Okay, Madam Clerk, were there any public members that signed on for this meeting?
Not this evening, Your Worship. No public members are attending.
Okay, was the applicant online for this?
Yes.
Mr. Mohammed, would you like to share any comments?
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the opportunity. In just in regards to this permit application, yes, we are proposing a basement rental, which is as per the zoning bylaw located in a cellar. And yes, I had heard some of the questions that the committee members made uh, in regards to the stairwell being dug open. So I just need to clarify that we are just proposing a door, and the existing stairwell is built by the builder, and there's no external stairwell being made to lead into the basement. And furthermore, about the issue with the washrooms, yes, we are proposing 2 washrooms in the basement, but we will definitely be in contact during the building permit stage with the city staff to make sure that it is adequate and it's not going overboard. And whatever other requirements set forth by the staff comments in regards to the town engineer's clarification and to obtain the building permit, we will be doing that before any construction takes place. I'm here to answer any questions if you may have any.
All right, so Steve's recommendation is to approve the application subject to the conditions that he outlined in the presentation. Are there any members that would like to make a motion? Okay, I have board member Donato, seconded by member Hull. Okay, so the motion will read then, after considering the application, the committee is satisfied that the request is minor in nature, desirable for the appropriate and continued use of the subject property, and maintains the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw and official plan. Accordingly, the committee resolves to grant the request. The minor variance is granted in accordance with the sketch plan provided to the committee and attached here too, only to allow the existing single detached dwelling at 246 Irwin Street to be used as a converted dwelling with a minimum of 2 dwelling units, no more than one of which may be located within the lowest level of the existing dwelling in an approximately designed and finished habitable space that meets building, fire, and electrical safety code requirements, and subject to the following 2 conditions. Number 1, that the owner shall obtain confirmation of sufficient reserve servicing capacity by the town engineer for the stage 1 area and allocation of servicing for the additional residential unit prior to a municipal approval of a building permit. And number 2, that the owner shall obtain a building permit for the additional residential unit within 1 year of satisfying condition number 1, failing which the servicing allocation shall be revoked and this minor variance shall lapse unless the committee has granted an extension prior to the expiry thereof. Are there any further comments or questions on that before I call the question? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, and that's carried. All right. So on to the next one, Steve.
Yes, I do have another presentation for the next one. Okay, give me a second. So the second application on tonight's agenda is for application B2201, which is 250 Main Street East. So this is just to the east of the downtown. An existing property at the northwest corner of James Street North and Main Street East. So you can see there's an existing historical home on the property. It does face towards Main Street. And then there's some parking and an attached garage near the back of the dwelling facing towards James Street North. This is approximately the location of the proposed severance. The north half of the property is proposed to be a separate residential lot. It's not quite half the property, a little less than half, with the rest of the property remaining with the existing dwelling. So just to illustrate the neighborhood context a little bit, it's predominantly single detached in the immediate area, but there's a variety of other uses. This is a mixed use zoned area. So there are some commercial uses in the neighborhood, certainly to the north, with some of the other buildings in the area and dwellings containing businesses as well. There is a business name identified on the Google map and we haven't been able to confirm that there is in fact any kind of business operating from the dwelling. So this is the sketch that was provided by the applicant. So it's oriented with north to the right. So Main Street is over here on the left-hand side of the drawing. And as I mentioned, the existing home faces out towards Main Street, and then also has an exterior side yard on James Street. Basically what they're proposing to do, the owners would remove the existing attached garage here to make room for a bit of a rear yard in this location, in addition to the existing rear yard space here. And then they would upgrade or redevelop the driveway to ensure that there's a minimum of 2 parking spaces located behind the house in this location, with the entrance off of James Street in the vicinity of the existing driveway. And then for the proposed new house, it would face towards James Street North, but the access would be with a driveway off of the adjoining rear lane. It's a gravel lane, about 6.3 meters deep, with enough width to accommodate 2 cars, and a reduced rear yard of 3.8 meters, side yard of 1.5 meters on the interior side, and then a front yard of 3.8 meters. We've just indicated on here that some site-specific zoning is proposed for the retained and severed lots. There is a separate zoning application that was filed concurrently with this, and it is on the council agenda for tonight for a public meeting under the Planning Act for the separate zoning application. Just, and I'll provide more of these details as part of that public meeting, but just to ensure everybody's clear on the details of the zoning. So the existing lot facing Main Street, that would be retained for the existing house. The purpose of the rezoning for that lot would be simply to recognize the existing house on the property. So this should say 15.8 meters or 15.0 meters for the existing corner lot. So that's slightly smaller than the corner lot minimum frontage required, but that's an existing condition. There's no changes to the frontage of the existing lot. The minimum front yard would be 5 meters. The exterior side yard would be 3.2 meters. Again, those are all the existing statistics. 0.9 meter on the left or west side of the dwelling. And as a result of the changes with the new lot line proposed, the rear yard would be reduced to 5.3 meters. And then for the severed lot, the minimum lot area would be 300 square meters, so a bit smaller than the retained lot. The front yard would be 3.8 meters on James Street, 1.5 meter side yard on the south side adjoining the existing retained lot, and then 6 meters on the north to ensure there's sufficient space for parking of 2 cars off of the lane. And then finally, the rear yard would be 3.8 meters on this side of the new dwelling. So we have recommended some standard conditions just to ensure all of the fundamental requirements are addressed for the servicing and development of the lot. The first and second are standard, so cash in lieu of parkland at 5% of the value of the new lot. Obviously, there's not any justification for requiring a dedication of land in this case, because the land would be too small and not in an appropriate location for a new park. So that those funds go into a general reserve for future parkland acquisition and improvements. The consent agreement would address these items A through F. These are all standard items. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. Based on the air photo and based on the existing trees along the town's rear laneway, it looks like there could be some tree removals required in order to accommodate a new driveway in the back of this lot. And what we're recommending is that the consent agreement would require that any tree removals are identified through a more detailed lot grading plan before they are removed, and further that the owner would then be required to replace those with some new tree plantings in appropriate locations, either along the boulevard or along the laneway. Heritage is also a very important consideration, and we've given that some discussion in our report that's on your agenda. What we're recommending is that some basic design direction and guidelines should be created before the new home is built on the proposed severed lot, and that would be submitted and circulated for Heritage Committee review before the building permit would be issued, just to make sure that there's some sensitivity to the design of the dwelling and that it fits well within the neighborhood and doesn't look out of place in an historical context. Bell Canada has identified they have a utility pedestal at the rear lane behind the dwelling. It doesn't affect the ability to build on the lot for a new dwelling at all. It does require an easement though, so they can access it in future. So that would be a small easement required by Bell, and that would be dealt with in the consent agreement. And then there's some fees that would be required, the lot grading fee, the development charge, and any cost to the town for processing the more detailed plans would be recoverable from the owner at that time. As I mentioned, a separate zoning bylaw amendment has been filed and is on the council agenda for tonight for consideration by council in a public meeting. And it would, again, establish the required zoning. So the final approval of the consent would be conditional on the zoning bylaw being passed, and ultimately that it would comes into effect. A draft reference plan or survey will be required to precisely indicate the details of the lot and to facilitate the registration of the lot in the land registry office. And the Planning Act does now provide 2 years to satisfy conditions of consent approval, whereas before this year, it only provided 1 year. So I'll stop sharing my screen there. I have summarized in my report the circulation comments that were received. There's just a few notes about servicing requirements. Like many of the existing homes that have rear lanes, this has a sanitary sewer that comes in from the back of the lot. So that would have to be rerouted to avoid the new lot. And then servicing for the new lot is identified in the comments from the Director of Development and Operations as well. So all of those requirements would be subject to more detailed plans and the owner's responsibility for servicing the lot. And then we did receive one public comment earlier today as well. It's from the resident of 227 Main Street East. And she's just noted that her name is Anna Marie Mysuria. And she does indicate that she's requesting that the application to sever the land be denied as it does not meet minimum guidelines for the property to be divided. The other comments in the letter say this property has been an eyesore for several years. It has been abandoned and should not be allowed to be severed since the lot does not meet any of the requirements laid out in the bylaw. I appreciate my voice being heard. My objection is noted as of May 28th, 2022. We did share those comments with the applicant, and there hasn't been any signs or concerns that the property is either abandoned or in disrepair. So we think that they may have misunderstood the location of the proposed severed lot and what property is subject to the application. But I've asked my staff to get in touch with this person just to clarify those matters to make sure that they're looking at the right property. So that's my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions from the committee or members of the public. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Any questions from the committee? Member Buffett and then Member Anderson.
It's more of a comment than a question. I'm pleased to see that we have the Heritage Committee involved in that particular case, because it would be nice to see more of the same kind of style or similar style next to it so that that whole little area is really enhanced. So that's great.
Absolutely. Member Anderson.
Yeah, thank you. And just to follow up on Councillor Buffett, that was one of the issues that I wanted to speak to. And so thanks for covering that. The other is the potential for the tree removals and the replacement. And I know that Councillor or Member Bernardo rather and Member Wegner on previous applications have spoke rightly about what's going to be put in its place. So for example, you talked about, Steve, about making sure that you use the words out of character, I think, as you're pertaining maybe to the development itself from maybe the other homes in the area, if I understood you correctly. But I also want to make sure that the replacement of the trees is not out of character with respect to what is in that area. So by way of species and by way of maturity of trees. And so I just want to make sure that there's an opportunity for us to sort of survey that scape and to make sure that what's being replaced is in lockstep with what's existing by way of species and maturity by way of replanting.
Certainly, and through you, Mr. Chair. So before any trees are impacted or removed, they're the details of those trees, their condition, their species, and their size and maturity will be assessed and documented. And then the only limitation, of course, in planting new trees is that you often can't source large trees, and transplanting large trees into like a boulevard type of environment is challenging. So typical new streetscape plantings and laneway plantings would be pretty small to begin with, typically. But they are selected from a kind of a pre-approved list of trees that are in the town's design criteria for that kind of environment, where, you know, there's factoring in spacing from other things in the boulevard, like the sidewalk and utility poles and overhead wires and all of those kinds of things, and driveways to avoid any sightline issues or other impacts, but also species that are native to the area and we know aren't going to have a strong risk of dying, and that can survive in that kind of environment. So as I say, I don't have any exact details yet on whether there will need to be some tree removals along the lane, but they're quite densely packed along that that side of the lane, and the lane is kind of narrowed as a result of that. So I think to achieve an entrance back there and make sure there's adequate room to maneuver a vehicle in and out, it looks like there might have to be a couple of tree removals. So we would then find an appropriate location for some new plantings to address that.
Member Bernardo.
I'm just going to follow up on Councillor Deputy Mayor Anderson's comments. I know you mentioned planting trees along, but my concern is we take out 100-year-old trees and we plant trees that are going to take 100 years to grow. And I know for a fact that you can get trees that are at least 20 years in the growth pattern, a little bit bigger than something that's going to take 100 years to get there. So if we're taking out trees that are 100 years old, we should be looking for replacements of something of reasonable size that won't take 100 years to grow to replace them. So that is my concern. So when we're doing these replacements and we are looking for places to put them, let's make sure we put something that is adequate in the area, not something that's a little shrub that's going to look pretty on a boulevard or on a garden.
Member Wagner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I do want to follow up with this as well. Is there any way to potentially maybe rearrange the driveways in order to, if that's the case, where the driveway might be causing a very established, mature, tree to be removed? Could there be the potential to sort of reassess where the driveways are located? Could they come off of, is it James Street? Am I correct with saying that? Instead of the laneway, for example, with moving it just slightly to the right and almost having it the same idea as the retained lot, how the two driveways are going to be facing off of James Street, but sort of pushed back just a little bit behind the dwelling. The new proposed dwelling, you could almost do the same kind of idea where you would have the driveways to if you're looking at the building, they would be to the right of the building in the same sort of location instead of entering off the laneway. So, just something to potentially keep in mind that, if it's a beautiful tree, it's substantial, it's maple or oak or something that is, obviously desirable, that we try our best to not take it down if it's something as simple as location of a driveway, right? I mean, I get it if it's affecting the actual building itself, the foundation or whatever, and establishing that. But if it's something as simple as just a driveway where cars are going to park, maybe we could review that a little bit and make some adjustments as to where that, they would go before we take down a mature tree. So yeah, just my thought and opinion on trying to save the trees. Thank you.
Any thoughts on that, Steve?
All of that's duly noted. The town ultimately, through staff, have a full approval authority over where driveways go and where trees on town property may or may not be removed. So we can control some of those elements for sure. And once we have a more detailed plan and understanding of what would need to be or what is proposed to be removed and where the driveway could be, we can make sure that's all optimized to the extent possible.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Okay. Are there any members of the public?
No, sir. There are no members attending this meeting either.
Okay. The applicants are signed on, I understand.
We're here. Can you hear us?
Yeah. Hi there. How you doing?
Good. It's Ken Bennington here.
Hey, Ken.
I'm here with Owen and Sarah, of course.
Okay. Any thoughts or input you guys want to share?
In terms of the discussion around the trees, we just want to make everyone aware that these are not prestigious maples or oaks. A lot of tall cedars. They might actually be on the town property, to be quite honest. And they've suffered from years of plow abuse and ice storm damage. So they're not really trees that can be saved. And then we just want to make note that in this older part of town, many of these homes are serviced still by overhead hydro services and wires. And so we just got to be mindful. Of course, we'll do whatever we can to save a tree if we can. But of course, we'll plant new ones where necessary. But I'm not sure their current location is the best spot for them to survive. But of course, if one comes down, we're happy to replant another.
Okay.
Okay. And then my other comment was in terms of the heritage. That's been our plan all along, is to match the historic older area of Main Street. We've seen some other developments in town that, in my opinion, don't fit. We want to make sure that this one does and is pleasing for the neighbors.
Okay. Good stuff. Any further questions from the committee to the applicant specifically while they're here? Okay, I don't see any. So again, the planner's recommendation is to approve the application subject to the conditions that have been highlighted there. Is there a member who'd like to make a motion? Okay, so I have board member Fegan, seconded by board member Hall. All right, so it's a lengthy motion, so bear with me. After considering the application, the committee is satisfied with allowing this consent for the purpose of severing 303.25 square meters of land from the original 682 square meters of lot area. The committee, having regard to those matters under subsection 51, subsection 4 of the Planning Act as amended, resolves to grant provisional consent subject to the following conditions being fulfilled. Number one, the Secretary Treasurer's certificate under subsection 5342 of the Planning Act shall be issued and the Secretary Treasurer's fee be paid. Number two, the payment of cash in lieu of parkland at the rate of 5% of the value of the newly created lot. And number three, that the owner enter into an agreement with the town addressing the following matters. A, site servicing and drainage requirements and the details of all servicing connections, modifications and improvements to existing services, including sanitary sewers, water supply, storm sewers, roads, sidewalks, hydrants, utilities, and any required easements deemed necessary by the town in accordance with town standards, and to the satisfaction of the town's Director of Development and Operations and the town's engineer. B, the requirement to remove the existing attached garage and to construct a new driveway and required parking spaces on the retained lot and on the severed lot. C, the requirement to provide drawings indicating the location and details of the driveways, including the requirement for replacement of any trees requiring removal to the satisfaction of the town. D, design guidelines for the new dwelling to be constructed on the proposed severed lot with input from the Heritage Committee. E, the dedication of an easement to the satisfaction of Bell Canada. And F, the payment of required fees. Number 4, that the owner obtain approval of a zoning bylaw amendment for the 2 resultant lots to a zone that will accommodate the proposed lot areas, yards, and setbacks. And that's the matter that will be addressed a little later and under the regular council agenda. 5, that approval of the draft reference plan as applicable shall be obtained at the Committee of Adjustment office, which is the town hall. And the required number of prints, which is 3, of the resultant deposited reference plan shall be received. And finally, 6, that the conditions are to be fulfilled and the consent is to be finalized on or before 2 years from the date of the issuance of the committee's notice of decision. Any final comments or questions? All in favor? And that's carried. Okay, thank you all. That's it, Steve, for Committee of Adjustment.
Yes, that's it for tonight. Thanks.
Okay, excellent. Can I have a motion to adjourn Committee of Adjustment then? Moved by Member Buffett, seconded by Member Wagner. All in favor? That's carried. All right, on to the regular council agenda. We'll call that meeting to order at 7:11. And we will begin with the playing of the national anthem. And as always, before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, including the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Chippewa, and the people of the Three Fires Confederacy. Just a standard reminder that members of council are required to state any pecuniary interest in accordance with the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. On to the minutes from the April 25th and May 9th meetings of council. Can I have a motion to adopt both sets of minutes? Councillor Fegan, seconded by Councillor Buffett. Any discussion on either set of minutes? Okay, seeing none, all in favor? That's carried. Madam Clerk, were there any questions submitted for question period?
No questions this evening, Your Worship.
Okay. All right, so we have one presentation and then a few proclamations to follow. So we're going to start with presentation of our 2021 draft financial statements from BDO. So we are joined this evening by Tracy Smith and Angela Nickel. They will walk us through an exciting presentation on our audited financial statements. Welcome.
It almost sounded like sarcasm.
Not at all, not at all.
I think Angela is joining us there. Yep. All right. We would like to thank the council for inviting us to your meeting tonight. We'd like to thank Carrie, Marion, and their team for their assistance they provided to us during the audit. I will present a short high-level overview of the auditor's report and portions of the draft financial statement. The presentation starts on page 32 of your council agenda package. A full complete copy of the financial statements has been provided in your council agenda on page 81. The statements are in draft and need to be approved by council before they can be released in final. Angela will present some highlights of the municipality's performance using some graphical analysis, and she will also summarize the auditor's communication to council on page 60 of the agenda package. Management is responsible for preparing the financial statements. It's our responsibility as your auditor to give an opinion on the financial statements prepared by management. An audit opinion is the highest level of assurance we can provide as public accountants. And we obtained a sufficient and appropriate audit evidence to provide an unqualified opinion. Our opinion is in the second paragraph, and in our opinion, the financial statements were presented fairly in all material respects in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards, which basically means we didn't find any issues during the audit and we gave a clean opinion on the financial statements. The audit report goes in significant detail about the responsibility of management and those charged with governance. And on the next page, the auditor report clarifies the responsibilities of the auditor. So once approved by council, we can complete the audit and release the final financial statements and sign our audit report if approved tonight at this meeting. The financial statements are prepared on a consolidated basis. Therefore, 100% of the assets, liabilities, revenues, and expenses are included for the Shelburne Public Library, the BIA, Centre Dufferin Recreation Complex, and the financial statements also include Shelburne's 54.69% of the Shelburne Fire Department. Separate review engagement reports have been prepared for the library, the fire department, and Centre Dufferin Recreation, and a notice to reader report was prepared for the BIA. The statement of financial position, or the balance sheet, is at a point in time at December 31st, 2021. Assets totaled $29.3 million. The largest asset is the cash and investments totaling $27.1 million. The increase in cash of $5.6 million is mainly because of the increase in your obligatory reserves of $4.1 million. The obligatory reserves are unspent development charges and gas tax funds, and they are only recognized as revenue when spent. So the unspent amount shows on the balance sheet as a liability. So you can see the unspent portion increased in the library's liability section there to just over 14 million. So the unspent portion of those fees are still sitting in cash. The liabilities totaled $21 million. Significant liabilities are the deferred revenue, as we've just discussed. Other significant liabilities is the external debt, of which $448,000 was paid off, leaving a balance owing of $3.9 million. The net financial assets is a key financial indicator and is the total of your assets less your liabilities. Positive means you have resources for the future. Net financial assets increases when your reserves are increasing and when you're paying off your debt. Non-financial assets include your physical tangible capital assets, your roads, your buildings, equipment, water and sewer systems, and they're reported at cost less amortization, which is the estimate of use over time. So it's important to note that that's not replacement cost. You have your asset management plan to try to manage those replacement costs. In the financial statements, they're reported at historical cost. The net increase in tangible capital assets reflects additions of 3.7 million, less amortization of 2.4 million. And then that brings us down to the accumulated surplus, and that's the equity of the town, and includes both monetary and physical assets for a total of $80.8 million. The statement of operations and cumulative surplus reports all the transactions during the year. It is consolidated, including the library, the DIA, the rec complex, and your share of the fire. Revenues totaled 17.6 million. Included in revenue are all your external sources of revenue for operating and capital costs. It does not include any transfers from reserves. Your most significant change is the other revenues. In 2020, you had $6.1 million in contributed assets. And so that's why there was a large number in the prior year. The grants are less than budget because you didn't get approval for the well 3 grant, and more than the prior year because you did receive some extra roads construction grants and town hall grants. The user fee increase is because of planning application fees, water meter sales, and parkland revenues. The expenses include all your operating costs and amortization, which is the estimate of the wear and tear on those physical assets from their use. The budget expenses have been adjusted to include amortization, so the budget and actuals can be compared. Expenses do not include capital assets purchased, and they also don't include any transfers to reserves. The total revenues less total expenses for the year is the annual surplus of 2.2. It's important to note that is the annual surplus, and that's not your operating surplus. That affects your budget and your tax rates. The operating surplus for the year was $411,854, and that was transferred to reserves as approved by council. The annual surplus that you see on this statement is what you've raised during the year from external sources after paying all your operating costs and covering amortization. So from this annual surplus, you need to pay for your capital assets and you need to make your debt payments. So we go to the next statement. And so then we start this statement with the 2.2 annual surplus, and then we adjust it for the actual capital purchases during the year and the amortization. So the statement comes down to the increase in net financial assets, which agrees back to your balance sheet. This can be either positive or negative. Positive doesn't necessarily mean good, and negative doesn't necessarily mean bad. It just depends on where you are in your capital asset plan and whether you're budgeting to take funds from your reserve to buy your capital assets, or whether you're building up your reserves to pay for capital assets later. So in 2021, you budgeted to have a negative amount, which means you were going to take money from the reserves. The actual came in just over $1 million positive, which means some capital projects did not proceed, so you didn't have to take the money from the reserves. 7.8 million was budgeted for capital assets, but only 7.8 million was budgeted for capital assets, but only 3.7 was actually spent. The last statement shows the activity in cash and cash equivalents for the year. So the actual physical money in your bank accounts. Cash flow from operations was approximately 9.3 million in the middle of the page there. And a significant portion of that was the 4.1 million in development charges that were not spent. Cash flow to repay long-term debt was approximately 448,000, and 3.6 million was invested in tangible capital assets, bringing it down to an overall increase in your cash of $4.2 million. Note 9, which is on page 100 of your agenda, is the accumulated surplus note, and this provides details of where that accumulated surplus of $80.8 million that you saw on the balance sheet and what makes up that balance. The town had an operating surplus of 411,854. However, it was transferred to reserves. So it is included in the reserve balance of 13.1. So this is the only place on your financial statements where you would find that operating surplus. Net invested in capital assets was $68.4 million and is the amount the municipality has invested in capital assets over the years, less the amount that is still owing on debt to finance those capital assets. The unfunded solid waste closure and post-closure costs are estimated based on estimates of future costs and will be funded on an annual basis as those costs are incurred. So at this point, I will turn it over to Angela to provide more details and financial highlights as she looks at the numbers in a graphical format.
So the first one here is the long-term debt. So as you can see in 2016, which doesn't show on here, you had some significant increases due to the additional two loans that were entered into in that year. And from then on, you have been, your long-term debt's been slowly decreasing with the annual repayments. So this goes over the reserves. So reserves and your discretionary reserve funds have been kind of steadily building over the past 5 years. The biggest increase is in your roads and water and sewer reserves. So this one goes through your obligatory reserve funds. So you can see a pretty significant increase in 2020 and 2021 in your development charges that you've collected and remain unspent. So this is your revenue. So 2017 at the top and 2021 at the bottom. So there hasn't been any significant changes in the sources of revenue between these two periods. A couple kind of minor changes. So other income has decreased from 20% of revenue to only 14% in the current year. And as a result, figures and user charges was 25% in 2017 and has increased to 29% in 2021. So this one goes through your operating grant. So you can see the decrease in the OMPF grant kind of continuously for the past 5 years. But there were some one-time operating grants received in 2019 and COVID-related grants received in 2021, which is what those two kind of spikes are. So this is your capital grants. So in 2017, you received some water and sewer capital grants, and in 2021, there was some road-related capital grants. But other than those 2 years, capital grants remain pretty minor to the municipality. So we looked at capital grants, and now we're going to look at capital expenditures. So your capital expenditures have ranged pretty much between the $1.5 to $2 million mark for the past 5 years, except the kind of outlier, so that 2019 year where your capital assets came in significantly lower. So this looks at the most significant costs of the municipality. So your most significant cost is the police at 29.95% of the cost. Water and sewer is the next largest cost for the municipality at 19.67%, followed by general government at 13.8% and roads at 11.8%. So this shows the expenses again from 2017 at the top to 2020 at the bottom. So due to the change in policing from the Shelburne Police to OPP, there's a decrease in the salaries compared to these 2 years and an increase in your contracted services. And then finally, so your reserve have been steadily increasing for the past 5 years, as has cash and your net financial assets. So you just need to figure out and continue to find that balance with building up reserves and reserve funds and paying off long-term debt and funding your future capital expenditures. And so the final slide here is just the final letter to council, which was included in your council packages. So the final letter to council contains all of the required communications in accordance with the generally auditing standards, Canadian auditing standards. The communication would be very similar to year, as the required communication is defined by the standards and needs to be reported on an annual basis. So the status of the audit. So the financial statements are in draft format and will require council approval before they can be released in final. Once approved by council, we'll need to obtain a signed representation letter from management and perform subsequent events procedures up to the date of approval. We can confirm that we are independent from the town. Materiality. So amounts are material to the town if they would affect the decisions of the users relying on the financial statements. Materiality for the 2021 audit is $440,000 and unadjusted differences total $2,572. There were no changes to our plan procedures and no issues were identified in our testings performed. No additional risks were identified throughout the audit, and significant accounting estimates include post-employment benefits, taxation revenue estimates, and a liability for the contaminated sites. We are required to report in writing any significant deficiencies in internal controls that were identified during the audit, and we did not identify any deficiencies in internal controls that were tested during the audit. We would like to thank council for having us here this evening and would be happy to answer any further questions you have. I'm going to stop sharing.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions for Tracy or Angela? No? Okay. Can I have a motion then to receive and approve the 2021 financial statements from BDO as presented by Councillor Hall, seconded by Councillor Fegan. Okay. Last chance for discussion. Okay. I'll just throw in a quick thank you to our staff, Carrie and Marion in particular, for all the work that went into that. I know it was a bit of a process, as it always is, but another year is behind you, and I guess you can move on to something new and more exciting now. So, all right, if there are no other questions or comments, then I'll call the question. All in favor? That's carried. All right, thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Take care. Okay, so we have a few proclamations this evening. The first is a new one, and this is to proclaim 2022 as Year of the Garden. So this proclamation reads as follows: whereas Communities in Bloom and Fleuron du Québec, in collaboration with the Canadian Garden Council, invite all municipalities to celebrate the Year of the Garden 2022. And whereas gardens and gardening contribute to the quality of life of our municipality, our climate action goals, and create safe and healthy places where people can come together in the spirit of inclusivity and reconciliation. And whereas the Year of the Garden 2022 celebrates the centennial of Canada's horticultural sector and will highlight and celebrate the important contribution of gardeners, our local gardening organizations, horticultural professionals, and local horticultural businesses which contribute to garden culture and experience of our municipality. And whereas gardens and gardening have helped us face the challenges of the COVID pandemic, now therefore be it resolved that the Saturday before Father's Day, National Garden Day on June 18th, 2022 be recognized as Garden Day in the town of Shelburne as a legacy of Canada's Year of the Garden 2022. And that the town of Shelburne is committed to be a garden-friendly town, supporting the development of its community garden and downtown hanging basket projects, and that all municipalities across Canada be invited to proclaim 2022 to be the Year of the Garden in their respective municipalities, and that a copy of this resolution be provided to the FCM for that purpose, and that I, Mayor Wade Mills, do hereby proclaim 2022 as Year of the Garden in the town of Shelburne in celebration of the contribution of gardens and gardening to the development of our country, our municipality, and the lives of our citizens in terms of health, quality of life, and environmental challenges. And Jennifer, I believe it was Carol who suggested that one, Carol Maitland?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so thanks to Carol for bringing that one up. The second proclamation is for Pride Month. Whereas every year cities all around the world celebrate the diversity that strengthens our town to commemorate and support sexual and gender minorities' liberation. And whereas Pride Month is a positive stance against discrimination and violence toward lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people to promote their self-affirmation, dignity, equality rights, increase their visibility as a social group, build community, and celebrate sexual diversity and gender variance. And whereas the rainbow flag is the most recognized symbol designated in 1978, and whereas Pride Month in Shelburne is an opportunity to prevent discrimination and promote awareness and acceptance of every human person, and to promote the development of harmonious relationships amongst all members of the community. And whereas we support an inclusive and respectful community where all citizens can live, work, and play in a safe and secure environment. Now, therefore, I, Mayor Wade Mills, do hereby proclaim June 2022 as Pride Month in the town of Shelburne. And just sort of as a heads up to members of council and members of the community who may be interested, we are going to raise the Pride flag on Wednesday, June the 1st at 11 o'clock. We've coordinated that with some local organizations, and 11 o'clock seems to be the time that is going to work in Shelburne. So anybody who can make it out, be happy to see you there. And that's going to be at the flagpole at Jack Downing Park. And the third and final proclamation is for ALS Awareness Month. So whereas amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, is a rapidly fatal motor neuron disease for which there is no known cause or cure for, and whereas over 2,500 Canadians at any given time are living with ALS, and whereas ALS is known as Lou Gehrig's disease, it can strike anyone regardless of age, gender, or circumstances, and whereas recent advances in ALS research have produced promising leads, and we must continue this crucial work. And whereas the ALS Society of Canada is dedicated to providing direct support to ALS patients, along with their families and caregivers, to ensure the best quality of life possible while living with ALS. Now, therefore, I, Mayor Wade Mills, do hereby proclaim June 2022 as ALS Awareness Month in the town of Shelburne. And I believe it was Councillor Fegan that first brought this one forward last year in honor of his late mother-in-law. So again, Councillor Fegan, thanks for advocating on behalf of that. And yeah, I think it's probably a tradition that will continue beyond this council. So that's good. Okay, on to the planning public meeting. So this is a public meeting under Section 34 of the Planning Act, and it is to consider an application for a zoning bylaw amendment, which was in relation to the Committee of Adjustment matter that we dealt with earlier. And again, this is for the lands known municipally as 250 Main Street East. The purpose and effect of the amendment is to rezone the property from mixed use commercial, which is C2 zone, to a new site-specific mixed use commercial exception. And with that, I will ask Jennifer to indicate the method of notice for tonight's public meeting.
Notice of tonight's public meeting was advertised in local media sources. Notice has been posted on the town's website, and notice was provided to property owners within a 120-meter radius of the subject property.
Okay, thank you. And again, we will invite our town planner to provide a presentation on this. And then following that presentation, there'll be an opportunity for members of council as well as any members of the public who are signed on to ask questions or provide comments. And we will also be accepting written submissions through the clerk's office, and those submissions, all submissions, whether they're written or oral, will be considered as part of council's final decision. So Steve, with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Mills. So I will be brief, as this application was covered to some extent already through the Committee of Adjustment meeting held earlier tonight. So again, this is Z2201, application for zoning bylaw amendment for 250 Main Street East. And you're aware of the property location at the northwest corner of James Street North and Main Street East. Again, the dashed line shown here is approximately the boundary of the new severed lot that was provisionally approved in the Committee of Adjustment earlier tonight. The zoning application is a condition of that severance, and the details of the application were provided concurrently with the consent application. Since council is the approval authority for rezonings, that's why this is dealt with separately from the consent, which was presented to Committee of Adjustment. So Again, just to cover off the details, the C2-8 is a new zone that would be applied to the existing house and the retained lot that would remain with that existing house. And for the most part is just recognizing the existing yards that apply to that existing house. Lot is already 15 meters wide, so that's the existing frontage. The lot area would be reduced from the original to just the retained lot, so that zoning would recognize that new lot configuration. But the front and exterior side and interior side yards are all as they exist today, and it's just recognizing those. Obviously, the house and its siting on the lot predate the existing zoning bylaw by many years. And then the rear yard is reflecting the new rear yard setback as a result of two things. One is the new lot line that would go in here with the severance, as well as the removal of the existing attached garage. And then for the severed lot, so the north part of the property, the lot area there is approximately 300 square meters, so that would become the minimum for that new lot. The front yard would be 3.8 meters, so matching with the exterior side yard or a little bit more than the exterior side yard depth of the existing lot. Minimum interior side yard would be required of 1.5 meters on the south side and 6 meters in the north. And then the rear yard would be 3.8 meters, which is from the west. So this is just a table that summarizes that same information, but compares what the zoning requires by default for the C2 zone, which refers to the R2 zone for residential uses, and how it would be varied from those through site-specific provisions for the retained lot and the severed lot. So the gray provisions are the provisions that would be changed as a result of the site-specific zone. In many cases, it's a reduction. For example, 6 meter front yard is required for the severed lot, but 3.8 meters is proposed. But on the other hand, a minimum interior side yard of 1.2 meters is required, and both the side yards would be larger. So what we're trying to do here with these site-specific standards is provide a reasonable building envelope, but still achieve a reasonable yard area, similar to what would be achieved overall on the lot if the default zone provisions were applied. This is the same graphic that was presented for the Committee of Adjustment meeting, and it just highlights the proposed yards on the plan. So again, the C2-9 zone for the proposed dwelling on the new severed lot off of James Street North, and the existing yards and frontage requirements for the existing lot, which would be recognized through this site-specific zoning, as well as the reduced rear yard of 5.28 meters instead of 7.5 meters. So that concludes my presentation. There's a bit of a summary of the agency comments and department comments that were received in my report, but there were no objections through that circulation. There was the one public comment that I mentioned in the Committee of Adjustment presentation. That comment was not specifically in reference to the zoning, so isn't part of this file, but just to make council aware again, there is one resident who's indicated concern with the severance that relates to this application. So with that, that concludes my presentation, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Steve. Councillor Buffett and then Deputy Mayor Anderson.
Yeah, through you to Steve. The two different commercial zoning designations that you have on each lot, does that allow for any different commercial uses, or is that just based on the size of the actual lot?
No, it doesn't change the permitted uses at all. What it does is just provide site-specific regulations for a dwelling on each lot. Yeah.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Anderson.
Okay, thank you. Steve, this with respect to the public comment, because earlier you mentioned you weren't really sure whether the comments were specific to this particular project, that there might be a misunderstanding. So I'm just wondering whether once your staff reaches out to the individual, whether we'll get an update on that. Because even if it's another property and there's an allegation that it's an eyesore, I think that it's something that I think as a council, maybe we should know, and if there's anything that we could do, whether it's encouragement or otherwise, then I think it's important to get that information.
Certainly through you, Mr. Mayor, we will endeavor to get more information from the resident, and then we can share an update by email to council members afterwards.
Any other questions for Steve? No. Okay. So the recommendation is to approve the application and move forward with the bylaw that's provided there. Do I have a mover and seconder for that? By Councillor Buffett, seconded by Councillor Fegan. All right, so the motion will read, be it resolved, the council receive report P 2022-14 as information, and that leave be given for the reading and enacting of bylaw number 27-2022, being a bylaw to amend zoning bylaw number 38-2007 as amended by rezoning the lands known municipally as 250 Main Street East in the town of Shelburne. Any final comments on that one? All in favor? That's carried. All right. Council inquiries. Are there any inquiries for this evening? Councillor Fegan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you again for the, both to you and to the staff for putting the proclamation for ALS awareness again this year. I do hope that this is going to be a long-standing tradition. As most of you know, my mother-in-law was diagnosed and did pass with ALS. One of the things the family wanted to share publicly is that we've actually started an annual tradition of a 5K walk for ALS. And it was requested of me to see if I could make mention of it tonight. So if anybody, both council, staff, and public are interested, we're going to meet at the, where is the meeting at the Ag Center, I believe it is? Yes, Agricultural Center on Sunday at 9:30 for anybody who's interested in participating. It will be a 5K walk along with a shorter one for those who may not be able to do the full 5K. So just wanted to put that invitation out and invite everybody.
Okay, good. And that's this Sunday?
That's this Sunday, yeah.
Perfect. All right. Deputy Mayor Anderson.
Thank you. And just as a follow-up to Councillor Fegan, if one is not able to attend, is there an opportunity to make a financial donation?
There certainly will be. I'm not up to speed on who's raising the funds right now, but I will certainly get back to you. What I'll do is I'll get the information on where donations can be made and make sure that that's forwarded to everybody.
Thank you. Yeah, no problem. I just have a couple of inquiries, and then I have a few comments, if I may, Mayor.
Sure.
Mills. Thank you. So I'll start with the inquiries first. This is with respect to an email that I received that I'm not sure if other members of council received. I'm sure that staff has. And so one is, and this is just for the public's benefit, about what role does the town have regarding vacant businesses? There's some concern that there's some, at least it's being alleged in the email, that there's some vacant stores that are downtown that have been turned into storage, et cetera, et cetera. And some people may believe that somehow the town has a role with respect to that. And so maybe if staff could just comment for the benefit of the public as to what role that we have or can play in those situations.
Denise, did you want to address that one, or Steve's here? I guess he could too.
Steve is as well. I mean, there's obviously with respect to end use, zoning has bearing on what's a prohibited or a permissible use. Again, I'm not sure, I, as a staff member, haven't seen the email, but certainly if somebody is using something for storage, it would depend on what kind of storage and what those materials may or may not be. Again, without a specific address about which business you may be referring to, I'm asking one of my colleagues if they can sort of chime in here with respect to what we can do, but we certainly don't have the authority to oversee what a business may or may not do within private property, as long as the zoning that is in place for that utilization is sanctioning the permissible uses.
Steve, Steve Weaver, did you want to add anything to that?
I think Denise covered the overall, scope of what the town can regulate, and that does occur through the zoning bylaw. And to Denise's point, like you can regulate, for example, whether a property can be used for a retail store, but not what they're selling necessarily, as long as it's legal product that they have a business license to sell, and they're allowed to sell that product by the supplier. The retailing of products from a retail store, the zoning would only go so far as to determine where you can sell products from in terms of what properties and buildings in town, not necessarily the specifics of what types of products. The only additional limitations to that general kind of what's permitted and what's prohibited by the zoning bylaw is there's a source protection plan. So certainly if somebody's storing any kind of hazardous or dangerous chemicals or any product that could be dangerous in terms of public safety or water quality impacts, that there are additional regulatory authorities through the town and through the source water protection plan that can be applied in that case.
Sorry, just before you move on, I see that Jennifer put her screen on too. Did you want to add something as well?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Just wanted to add that should any resident or member of the public have concerns, the way to engage any type of enforcement mechanism would be to file a formal complaint.
And I guess there is always the property standards bylaw too. I mean, if that's the concern, in terms of, standards being under the permissible threshold, that's an avenue as well. Okay.
Yeah, thank you all for that. I thought it would be helpful for the public to be aware of the limitations, I guess, that we have on what happens on private property. This is another one, inquiry, and I've gotten this on a few occasions. I'm sure others have as well. This was another email that came in, but this speaks to whether the town could contribute or help or provide financial assistance, maybe is a better way of putting it, to religious startups in our town. And so I was just wondering maybe if we could maybe just put on the record as to, for those who are making these inquiries, as to what the town could do or cannot do in those situations.
I think from my perspective, I mean, staff's more than happy to jump in, but I mean, I don't think there's been a practice in the past in providing any sort of financial assistance, for purely religious organizations. There is always the community grant funding application process. So, I mean, if an organization, wanted to put an application in, it could be judged on its merits. I mean, we have had some, faith-based organizations that provide kind of ancillary services, after school programs and stuff like that, which I know we funded in the past, but it wouldn't be sort of consistent with past practice to provide, funding for churches or worship centers or mosques, something like that, is sort of a purely religious purpose or object. Denise, I see you unmuted.
Thank you, Mayor Mills, through yourself. Certainly, we don't have a business or not-for-profit or religious startup fund, regardless of the exclusion that many grants actually apply with respect to religious organizations or initiatives. So the only thing that potentially that a religious organization would be eligible for would be when we reinstate the CIP and the facade improvements that are business related or not-for-profit or agency related. But otherwise, as the mayor's already stated, the grant funding is what is available, and there are some limitations on what the town considers eligible funding recipients.
Thank you. So the other are just comments. I think it was only appropriate after declaring this year as the year of the garden, and the mayor's, I think, attempt at French. I was quite impressed, actually, even though it was just a few words. But
it's been a number of years, believe me.
I can tell. So with that, I just wanted to just say that the event that was held at the community garden this weekend, the Three Sisters planting, was a huge success with respect to the partners that participated, that being Debbie from the Dufferin County Cultural Resource Circle that did a presentation, as everybody knows. There was the Indigenous teacher, Christy, that did the ceremony. There was obviously the members of the community that supported this. And obviously I wanted to thank council and staff for the role that they've played to even make this happen to begin with. And then the second one is the kickoff of the Shelburne Cricket Club. That in itself was a huge success, and obviously everybody around this table, including staff and the community, certainly had a major role in getting that sport off the ground. And just wanted to say that they're certainly appreciative of that. So those are the comments, and thank you very much.
Councilor Bernardo, I think I saw your hand earlier.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to question, are we done with road cleaning at this point? I believe, and I see Jim is on board here. I believe you mentioned earlier there are people that were cleaning the roads were going to come through a second time to clean roads. Is that still happening?
Through your worship, we did wrap that up about a week ago, and the contractors moved on to another municipality. So yes, we are finished in that aspect for this year for our normal sweeping.
So there won't be any more road cleaning at all? Because I've seen some people putting stuff onto the side of the road, I guess with the expectation that the second time around it would be coming through.
Yeah, they were around a number of times, I believe 3 times. So it should have been out already by all the postings that we had up on our website, social media there. So.
Okay, so that's good for people to know. I guess the other question I have is on the walkway in between Canfield and Robert. There's a lot of debris on the side of the walkway, and I'm wondering, are we able to go through and clean up some of that debris that's on the side of the walkway in between there? There's sand, there's looks like the cedar tree, I don't know what droppings on the side, along with whatever other garbage is on that side of the walkway. So I'm wondering if that can be cleaned up.
Through your worship, yes, I'll mention that to Public Works tomorrow and see if we can either run the sweeper through there on the tractor, or if get the fallings from the cedar fallout from the vegetation with the blower or something anyway. So I'll mention that to Public Works in the morning.
I think that the people walking through there would appreciate that.
And just while we're sort of on the issue of street sweeping, Jim, if you could pass along a word of thanks. I had a couple of downtown businesses comment on the cleanup that occurred on the sidewalks on Main Street. It's very much appreciated. I know walking that stretch several times a week, it did make a big difference. So it looks a lot better after the spring thaw and all the dust and dirt and everything that comes with that. So it looks much better heading into the summer. So thanks to the crew.
And if I can mention a follow-up on the storage on the stores for the residents, if anybody notices anything that is fire hazard, they can always make a complaint to the fire department, the fire chief, if there's a potential for anything that could cause fire within the downtown stores or any other place where storage is stored.
Yeah, good point. Okay, any other inquiries? Oh, Councillor Wagner.
Just very quickly, actually, it's for Jim. Line painting on the roads. Now that we are done the street sweeping, I sort of assume that the line painting will begin soon. It's generally a sore spot with most people around town. So just want to make sure that we are starting as soon as we can. And I know weather permitting as well, for sure. But just so the community knows that it's on our forefront, and hopefully will be happening soon.
Through your worship, yes, with our improved weather, the increased heat, it dries the paint much quicker, and no rain. The crew did start out this morning. So they've started with the stop bars to start with, since we do have the white paint, and they started in the south end on Simon Street, down in that area. So.
Good. Okay. All right, last call for inquiries. Okay. All right, so on to the regular agenda. The first item is a planning report regarding an application for site plan approval on the Stella Jones site located at 201 Wellington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I have a report in the agenda package as well as a copy of the site plan, and Kyle Brown from Stella Jones is here this evening as well, should council have any questions about the site plan. So I have a brief presentation just to provide a bit more detail to what's in my report. Give me a moment while I share that. So I'm sure council is familiar with the location, just to the west of the downtown area. I wanted just to highlight here, well, firstly, obviously this is a dated air photo. There's a subdivision, as we know, Highland Village to the west, now mostly built. And the on-site conditions in Stella Jones property outlined in red have changed as well, as they've been going through a phased improvement to the site. So you'll recall last September, there was a previous site plan approved for the original property, which is the south limit of that original property was here. And so that was the phase 2 approval. Phase 1 went forward via a site alteration bylaw, and that work has been completed. Phase 2 involved paving in the north part of the site and reconfiguring the driveway entrance for the trucking in this location, as well as the installation of a storm retention pond in this location. So that work is currently in progress for phase 2. Phase 3 is what's before you tonight, and that's a site plan approval request for a new distribution center building and associated site works in approximately this location. So this involves the expanded site with part of the property to the south that was acquired and merged with the original property, as well as the property at 600 Victoria Street, which has also been acquired and merged with the property. And then to the south limit of the site lies the Besley Drain in this location. So again, this is the previous site plan approval. Phase 1 was the paving and grading and stormwater management works related to the kind of central location of the site for the storage yard. And then phase 2 involved kind of the west side and northerly parts, as well as the pond and the truck access reconfiguration around the pond. And phase 3 is for the distribution center. So there's really two main plans. There's a whole host of studies and engineering reports and documents that have been submitted in support of the application. But the two main plans, just to illustrate the scope of work, are this one, which illustrates the positioning of the building that's proposed on the overall site. The proposed or required sanitary sewer, which would be dedicated to the town within an easement, which will run through the property in this location, as well as the fire route, which will come through the site. Fire access and emergency access will be available via the truck access on Main Street, and then through the site in this location along these dashed gray lines, all the way around the building and out again. So the more detailed site plan is for the south end. This is the shape of the building that's proposed. Just to get your bearings, the angled line through here is the former rail corridor, so the trail that runs through town, and then Victoria Street lies here. So the building would face south, and so it would be the front of the building, and the east side of the building will be visible from Victoria Street along here. The driveway access and site circulation and trucking will still be from the north end of the site, but there is provision on the site plan to add a Victoria Street entrance in the future as well. The reason that the Victoria Street entrance has been removed from the site plan for now as a future provision is that based on the consultation with the County of Dufferin, due to the load restrictions on County Road 11, it's not possible for Stella-Jones to relocate its trucking down to the south, out of the downtown area, which is one of the objectives of the plan. But that is something that can be added in future if there are changes to those half load restrictions, if the roads are upgraded, or how the county enforces those rules with respect to local businesses if that were to change. So we are continuing to consult with the county on that, because obviously there are some concerns about impacts to local industries with respect to the seasonal half load restriction. And the plan accounts for, allowing for continued trucking from the Main Street access, as well as the possibility of reconfiguring access to Victoria Street. So the overall building area shown in the darker gray here it's a 50,000 square foot building, so quite large. The back part of the property will be the distribution center and storage component itself. There'll be trucking bays in this location, as well as in the north. There will be an office component at the front. So this would replace the current office, which is on Main Street at 309 Main Street West, with a larger office joined with the distribution center building. And there is a stormwater facility that's required in this location between the rail corridor and the building to deal with the drainage. It would be a dry pond, and so would only really have water in it during a major storm event. The reason for the positioning of the building here as well is the Besley Drain does have a flood line associated with it, and it's shown on the plan, a little hard to see here, but the development is keeping the site works, the parking area, the servicing, the loading, the driveways, et cetera, outside of that floodplain area. One of the key considerations with this site improvement is, I'll go back to the air photo, just the interface with the residential to the east. Currently, as we know, the subdivision to the west is protected by an acoustic fence that's been constructed as part of that subdivision. To the east, however, there's no continuous acoustic fence. So there is a noise study that was submitted in conjunction with the distribution center site plan. And it does identify that there may be some noise impacts to some of the dwellings to the east as a result of trucking activity in the vicinity of the distribution center. So a noise fence will be required to be constructed along the east boundary. And Stella-Jones is working with its noise consultant, and you'll see in the site plan agreement that's in the agenda package that there's some provisions there to allow Stella-Jones to construct the new building, commence its operations, measure the actual sound levels, and then design the noise wall within a defined period of time after that and install it to make sure that it's exactly what is needed to mitigate the noise to the level required. So in the interim, there would be a combination of operational controls as well as storage of wood or other materials along here to mitigate the noise impact. And the site plan agreement establishes the required timing by which the noise fence would have to be installed after the operations initially begin. One of the added elements to that approach is that Stella-Jones has also indicated they would agree to construct a continuous fence of similar construction and height all the way along the east boundary, which will be a nice visual barrier to the residential areas to the east. Whereas right now there's differing fence treatments and age of fence along that boundary. And then the other key component to this development, so when Highland Village was built, there was not access through the Stella-Jones property. It was prior to Stella-Jones ownership of the property when that plan first came to be, to construct a portion of the trunk sanitary sewer and forced main that would outlet to the south. So right now, Stella-Jones drains to its pumping station, and the sewage from that development goes through the sanitary sewage network in the downtown area. That the downtown area sewage network is only sized to allow for the Highland Village subdivision flows to flow through it. So the downside of that arrangement is that you can't connect new developments to the pump station until this section of pipe is completed to allow the flows to be directed to the south to a larger trunk sewer. So one of the real benefits of this development is that it will provide the last piece of that sewer, which will not only serve the building in terms of its sanitary flows, but also the Highland Village sanitary flows would then be rerouted to that trunk sewer, which would free up capacity in the downtown sewer network. This will also allow property owners to the west of Highland Village and to the north of Main Street to connect to the west side pumping station for sanitary servicing. So this is really part and parcel with the overall servicing strategy for the town, because if those properties can't connect, they also would not obviously have any reason to contribute towards the wastewater plant upgrades in the future. So this will solve the conveyance problem of getting flows from the west side in the west side service area over to the wastewater treatment plant and freeing up some of the downtown capacity that's currently utilized by the Highland Village flows. I won't go through all the details of the site works here, but suffice it to say, all of the zoning requirements are met in terms of setbacks, coverage, landscaping. There's a lot of detailed plans with this that are not included in the presentation here and in my report tonight because it's just too much to cover. But there's a lot of good detailed information that's been provided addressing all technical requirements. These plans represent the second submission. The first submission was reviewed by the town and agencies, comments were provided, and this is the revised submission. There will need to be one more submission in order to address the comments that were given to the applicant on the second submission, but we're really getting down to the small details and minor technical matters for resolution. One of the changes though that will happen from the second to the third submission that Stella-Jones has recently advised us of is in the original submission, they had proposed a steel roof building for the entire distribution center. And then in the second submission came in with a like more of a fabric or cloth type for the longer back part of the building. So that's this part. And have since advised that in fact they will be returning in their third submission to the steel roof structure, so not the fabric roof, peaked roof design like this. So that'll change the view, how the elevations of the building look. The building, especially the long sides of the building here, won't be all that visible from adjoining properties and roadways. The most visible parts will be the south elevation, which you'll have this kind of upgraded office portion here, the steel building behind it. And then as I mentioned, this peak part would just be a flat roof, not a peaked roof as shown here. And then this is a zoom in of the east elevation. So this is the elevation that would face towards Victoria Street. So again, you have the shorter office component at the front, some steel roofed kind of 1 to 1.5 story space behind that. And then instead of this kind of canvas or cloth type structure behind, this would also be a flat steel roofed component to the building. I had anticipated that one of the key questions would be around trucking, and that's certainly been a key focus of the review of the application. Initially the volumes may sound high with 1,100 outbound trucks per year, but when you do the math on that and focus or consider that their operations are focused between April 1st and August 30th, it does result in only about 6 to 7 trucks per day for the outbound vehicle movements. And again, those would be using the Main Street truck access until a Victoria Street access could be added in the future without some truck restrictions in that direction. And then the inbound deliveries are much lower, less than 1/5 of that, which averages about 5 to 6 per week during that April 1st to August 30th season. staff traffic and visitor traffic is not expected to be very high with this development either. Only 33 to 36 new two-way vehicle trips in the peak hours. So when staff are arriving in the morning, leaving in the afternoon, those would be when the peak volumes would be anticipated. So a car every couple of minutes at the peak hour. And then that includes about 7 truck trips in the peak morning and the peak afternoon hour. So that's an overview of the proposed development. It is just a site plan. The property is zoned for what's proposed here. It will help Stella-Jones to continue and upgrade its operations on the site and add some employment as well. And as I mentioned, the key piece of the sewer network for the west side area, not only to service this property, but also the properties to the west and north for residential development. Obviously, the long-term vision for the property is that eventually it would become part of the west side residential neighborhood. So that is clearly a long-term prospect now that Stella-Jones is upgrading its industrial operations on the site. But that transition over a longer period of time was anticipated in the Shelburne West secondary plan if the property remained in industrial ownership as it has. So the good news is that the infrastructure that goes in will foresee and provide for future transition of the property if and when the owner desires to do that to residential use to complete kind of the east part of that west side neighborhood. A couple of conditions are recommended. One is that, like all site plans, that the owner should enter into a site plan agreement. So a draft of that agreement is in your agenda package. It is an amending agreement because an agreement was just recently entered into comprehensively for the site as part of the application last September for the phase 2 development. And as I mentioned, there is a third set of drawings required to finalize some of the minor technical comments and review comments from the circulation and from our planning review of the drawings. So in order to authorize staff to sign the agreement as well as the mayor to sign the agreement, we're recommending that bylaw 28-2022 should be enacted. And once all the final drawings and the agreement is finalized and executed by the owner, the mayor and clerk could then have that authorization to sign and execute the agreement. And then, in terms of timing, there's been some discussion with Kyle and his team on that as well. And if you have any questions about that, I'm sure Kyle would be happy to share kind of his goals in terms of when they would like to get this building underway and ultimately the timeline target for occupancy. So I'll pause there and stop sharing my screen and would be happy to address any questions.
Great, thanks, Steve. One quick one from me before I jump into the rest of council. Just in terms of the acoustic fencing, I just want to make sure, first of all, that I'm clear on this. So as I read the agreement, essentially Stella-Jones will have 90 days sort of post-construction to conduct, actual noise measurements and that sort of thing. At that point, they'll submit kind of their proposed noise attenuation measures for our approval. After that approval, they have another 90 days then to construct whatever fencing and noise mitigation measures are to be included. Is that correct?
That's the way it is structured in the agreement that's in your agenda package tonight. That's a good summary of that. The one thing I will note is that we have presented the agreement that way, both to yourselves and to the owners, with the note that we would look to shorten those timeframes as much as possible. The one thing that Stella-Jones has assured me is that they have on-site controls and measures that they can employ in the interim to minimize and mitigate any noise impacts. So the good thing about that approach is that sometimes you're obviously building an acoustic wall based on theoretical noise levels and without actually measuring the activities on the report, maybe not factoring in the prevailing wind or how fumes and other things are being impacted. So this would help to better understand all of those factors in relation to the noise wall design to make sure all of those impacts are mitigated to the extent possible. So I think it is beneficial to have a well-designed continuous fence that not only addresses the noise impact, but creates that visual interface and maybe even addresses some of the other impacts, whether it's dust or fumes or other things from the residential to the east.
Okay. I mean, I get the rationale, I guess, in some respects that, it's better to have actual data as opposed to just, projections or estimates. But I mean, one of the issues that I've encountered a number of times from residents in that area is that they're concerned with the level of noise based on just the present activity. And I guess my concern is, one of the retorts I've used in the past is that it was an existing facility, which has been in operation for a number of years. If we're increasing the size and scope and intensity of what they're doing there, I'll be honest, I'm not sure I'm entirely comfortable with the notion of waiting at least 6 months before those residents have any sort of protection against the additional noise that's going to be generated. I mean, I'll throw that out there. I'm interested to hear what my colleagues have to say on that. The second question I had, just in terms of seeking some clarity, is the intention that any sort of acoustic fencing is going to run the entire length of the eastern boundary? I wasn't sure, based on kind of the description that was used in the agreement, what the limitations were.
Yeah, that's the really key point of that kind of discussion and negotiation with the owner, is that it would be preferable from my perspective and from the town's engineer's perspective to just have a continuous, high quality new wood fence or whatever type of materials required to mitigate noise all the way along the east boundary. Technically speaking, their noise study shows they only need it for about 40% of that east boundary. And so beyond that, we can certainly require new privacy fencing, but not to the height and specification of the acoustic fence. And I think in an ideal scenario, we would like that acoustic quality or similar type of taller fence, high quality fence along the entire boundary for one consistent treatment. And so that was kind of the ask back from Stella-Jones. Well, if that's the case, to make sure we get it right, can we take some time, do the measurements, make sure we get it right as well. I know they're very interested to make sure they don't generate complaints and issues on the other side of the fence as well. There was that interim step of taking the time to make sure they get it right with respect to the design.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think there's benefit on both sides of the fence, pun intended, to making sure that this is designed properly and is sufficient in length to make sure that, whatever noise is generated there isn't impacting neighbors. And Kyle, I mean, by all means, chime in there. So Steve, from what I'm understanding from your comments, are that when we went back and indicated that our preference would be that a proper acoustic fencing be extended for the full length of that eastern boundary, Stella-Jones's reply was, okay, fine, we'll consider that, but give us some time to actually measure the real data, and then we'll construct something that makes sense. Does that properly?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to summarize things from my perspective. Yeah. Sorry, and Kyle's on the line here as well. If you have anything to add there, Kyle.
No, I think that summarizes it. I mean, once it's built and the foundations are in, it's very hard to rip it back out and go higher if that's what we need to do. We'd like to get it right the first time. Also, I think that timeline had more to do with where we are in the approval process. It's very likely that we're not going to finish building this until December, January. Very hard to sink foundations, 30, 60 days after that. I will say that the material storage on site exceeds the height of the sound fence that we're discussing at 3 to 3.5 meters. So there's no issue stacking material that is higher and denser than the sound wall requirement along the entire eastern side of the property, which I think would serve as a sound wall. We do that prior to the construction. I understand that's not a sound wall, but I think it would probably exceed what we would put in for a sound wall for that first, 90 to 120 days till we can sink those foundations.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, understanding that in terms of your construction timelines, that makes me feel a little bit better about it. I mean, I guess I was thinking probably worst case scenario that if construction happened right away, then there would be 6 months of prime construction time where a fence could be constructed where residents are going to have to endure that. But if it's sort of through winter months anyways, then, from a practical point of view, we might not actually be losing much time. So, okay. And I mean, I don't want to be negative about this. This is a very positive thing for the community. And I'm glad to see you guys here and bringing the business to town. It's just, as I said, I want to make sure that, people on both sides of the fence are happy and that you're not going to have neighbors who are less than positive about the good things that you're doing in town. So any other questions or comments? Councillor Bernardo?
I'm glad to see the fences going up, and I agree with you. I'd like to see it up as soon as possible, because some of the complaints I'm getting are on odor or smell or whatever you call it, not just noise. They're apparently on the east side. They're able to smell some of the products that are used for within there. And again, I think with the fence and maybe even with the piling of the materials that they piled, I might stop some of that wind going in their direction and that odor going in their direction. My other question is on the Victoria Street entrance. The county of Dufferin, that street right now up until County Road 11 is town, is it not?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. So
So
Victoria
why
Street
can't-
is the town.
So Steve, and I guess, is it not up to us to allow them to build the roadway to the town street? It's our bylaw that prevents trucks from going up and down Victoria Street to Main Street, not the county.
That's correct. So you can the town can control the presence of trucks between where Stella Jones site entrance would be, which would basically be across from Franklin Street, and then allow trucks to move south from there. But then there's nowhere for them to go but County Road 11, because it turns into County Road 11 south of the town limit. And if they were to go east, it is also County Road 11. And both those sections of County Road 11 have those seasonal load restrictions. And so they would have nowhere to go but into the downtown, and we don't want them to go on Victoria Street north of the proposed site entrance.
Now, going back to what you just said, seasonal road restrictions. There's part of the season when there's no road restrictions on that county road. So even if they were to build the entrance out to Victoria Street, at least part of that seasonal time frame, they can put trucks on County Road 11 on the county, even now. Which would take some of those trucks off of Main Street for part of that seasonal time frame.
Yeah, that's correct. So through you, Mr. Mayor, the seasonal load restriction is something that they put into effect based on frost and other conditions, and then they take off when they're satisfied that that is no longer an issue. And so it's usually sometime in May for several weeks. Can vary year to year, but you're right, it is only in place for part of the spring season.
So my question is, why would we not go ahead and allow them to build the roadway to Victoria Street? And for the few weeks they can put trucks on there, I mean, big deal. At least some of those trucks would not have to travel down Main Street from April to August.
And the site plan will fully allow for the driveway access from Victoria Street. It's just, Stella Jones didn't see, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Kyle, but didn't necessarily see the benefit of it if they couldn't put trucks to the south and east on County Road 11 for part of their season.
I think it was twofold. One, a substantial portion of our business happens in the half load season as we get ready for the construction season. And two, when we were discussing that, we were in the middle of discussing giving up the Main Street access. That was the bigger contributor. We're keeping the Main Street access. That would definitely be a more amenable suggestion for sure.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to think forward in my mind, Kyle, is, I mean, for the few weeks that the county doesn't allow for trucks to go down there, the majority of the time you are, you see the trucks going down County Road 11 through either over towards the second line of Amaranth, or fully down County Road 11. So I'm just thinking that if we could take some of the trucks off Main Street at some point in time, it would be a bigger help, because that's where more of the complaints are coming from our residents. That I know you don't put a huge amount of trucks, but there are a huge amount of trucks going down that main street throughout the year.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, go ahead.
I realize, like I was going to say, it's not necessarily your business, but there are other businesses and other, truck traffic coming through the town.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely open to once that's all sorted out, having that entrance there and using that entrance. I would, to your point, we're a very, very minute portion of the truck traffic through town, though. When we look at the traffic studies that have been done over the last couple of years and what we put through there, it's very small, but definitely if that was cleared up and the access, and I think, Steve, there was stuff about the county access, the rail trail, definitely open to setting up that access once it's cleaned up, and we can use that when we can.
Okay, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Anybody else? I want to circle back. Okay, Deputy Mayor.
Just a quick follow-up to Councillor Bernardo, because that was the point I was going to pick up on. Is you made the comment earlier about dust and fumes, and albeit it may be a small contributing factor, it's a contributing factor nonetheless. And I think the objective is to reduce the amount of trucks that are on our main street for a number of different reasons. I've received a number of people who live in the downtown core, and so even though the peak hours on its face may seem fine because we're saying, okay, it's during the day, but there are people who work night shifts and have to hear that truck traffic, and so that's certainly an issue. So when we talk about trucks, certainly there are trucks that are more louder than others, because there are times where I'm standing right by Town Hall and the trucks are coming down and I could barely hear the conversation that I'm having with somebody right in front of me. So when we talk about trucks, maybe just for the benefit of the public, what kind of trucks are we talking about that you're expecting to be going down the main street or down in our downtown core?
So the additional trucks would be small Moffett loaded trucks with the forklift on the back, 28 to 32 foot trucks, probably anywhere from 20 to 28,000 pounds. They're not full transport trucks in the phase 3 edition. The lumber plant that is currently existing does use full lumber trucks.
Okay, so they're smaller. Most of the trucks that you're talking about are smaller in size, not the full transport, which to me makes a big difference by way of noise and damage to our roads. Okay, all right, thank you.
Steve, I was wondering if you could put the map back up again, just to sort of get a visual bearing with respect to the sound fence. Yeah, and it may be one of the other images. I'm looking at page 6 of the amending agreement, where it refers to the location of the fence to be constructed. So it says that it will be along the easterly site boundary from the north side of the sanitary sewer easement to the north easterly corner of the property. So the northeasterly corner, that's obviously an easy point of reference, but what are we talking about when we talk about the north side of the sanitary sewer easement?
Yeah,
That's
so
right there.
this gray shaded area is where the sanitary sewer will be run.
Okay, so it is, for all intents and purposes, it is the full length of the eastern boundary.
Yeah, so there's, part of the added site here, but there's nothing in that vicinity like
that's the operations. So right,
exactly.
Yeah.
So the noise study showed that you need a fence, an acoustic fence to shield some of the on-site activities in here from about that location to this location.
Okay.
So what we're saying is that let's have it continuous all the way up to this.
Yeah, and I agree wholeheartedly with that suggestion. I think it should run the full length of that boundary. Just circling back to the discussion we had earlier, and either you or Kyle, can provide some comments on this, but I'm just wondering in terms of, degrees of acoustic fence, what differences potentially could we be looking at if we sort of proceeded based on the initial sort of estimated sound volumes, or waited until we had, real life data? Is there a major potential variance that we're looking at, or are we kind of splitting hairs here?
I don't think it would be significantly different from what the noise study is saying will be needed.
It's not the difference between, potentially a 6-foot fence versus, a 10-foot fence that's 3 feet thick or something,
No, the thickness usually isn't like with wood material. You have to double board it and use certain types of wood, and you can't have gaps. So there are certain design and construction methods that need to be used. And then in terms of the height, I know, like, for example, in Highland Village, once you got beyond a certain height, they went to a product that had metal posts and top and bottom rails, just to give it that additional rigidity and to stand up against the wind. But I think this would be at most as tall as the shortest sections of the Highland Village noise fence. So that noise fence varies from 3.5 meters to 4.5 meters. I think in this one, we're talking somewhere between 3 to 3.5. However, what the review would allow for was, based on the final grading, based on the height of the truck movements and the height of the trucks themselves, all of those on-site activities, measurements from different points. And then if there is a section that needs to be 4 meters instead of 3.5, that can be done to make sure that it's blocking the sound levels at the receptors on the other side. The ideal scenario though here is like a fence that doesn't go up and down and is kind of like pretty even across, but at least we would know, the upper limit of where the highest section would need to be, and precisely what kind of design is needed to achieve the sound levels that we're talking about.
So what would be the drawback, the disadvantage in going ahead and just sort of using the highest standards instead of waiting and determining whether in fact it's the highest standard that needs to be used or some reduced standard?
I mean, other than what Kyle has referenced, which is, having to do some of that work before you're done some of the site grading and stuff, and it's kind of the order of operations, and you're potentially damaging it and having to replace parts of it because you're working along that boundary, you're doing buildings and so forth afterwards, paving and final grading and that kind of stuff. I don't know if there are other disadvantages. I suppose the cost is the main one. Like if you're overbuilding, in certain sections, or overbuilding the whole thing, then it could cost quite a bit more.
I think too, like what we're talking about there, Steve, is we have 2 sound receptors that have like a minor sound exceedance that we were going to fix by putting up, say, 40% of the site with a sound wall. We're saying, hey, let's do it right, and let's run that wall up at our cost, 100% of the site, but let's do it at the right height, so we're not overbuilding, and then doubling the size of the fence that we were initially supposed to put in.
Yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, I would prefer to have the fence up, now. But I can also appreciate what you're saying, Kyle, that, you want to do it right, and you want to do it, based on actual data. So, I mean, I think on balance, I'm okay with it, as long as we sort of have your commitment that, that this is not going to, drag out any longer than necessary, and that, you are going to sort of do what's necessary to block the noise. I mean, as I said, at the risk of repeating myself, I think it's a mutual benefit. It benefits Stella Jones, as much as it benefits the neighbors, because you want to be seen, I think, as good neighbors to the residents in that area.
And something I should mention, I think that's probably pretty relevant, is the distribution center going in there is a pick and pack business for construction sites. typically the operations of the pick and pack don't kick off until, the second or third week of April. So probably by the time it's up and running and we've taken the sound measurements, we'll be starting to put that sound wall in just as it's kicking off. Really, there's 2 to 3% of the business runs January to March. Very little happens there during that time because sites are open.
Okay. And I would assume you're using most of your own materials for it. So
That's right.
You should be able to construct it fairly quickly.
Go fairly quickly.
No supply chain issues. Everything should be,
Not on our side. Not on our side.
Hand. You won't be coming back saying, look, we can't get wood.
That's true. That's true.
Okay. All right. All right. Any other thoughts? No? Okay. So the recommendation is to receive the report, obviously, and to enact the bylaw with the draft agreement that's attached in the agenda. Do I have a mover and seconder for that? Moved by Councillor Bernardo, seconded by Councillor Hall. Any further discussion on that? All in favor? It's carried. Okay. Why don't we take a quick 10-minute refresher and then we'll reconvene at 8:51 and finish off the rest of it.
Yeah.